this computer. Okay, so today we will have our next lecture. This time we are going to have a discussion on geomagnetic field. Okay, so today we're going to talk about geomagnetic field. So that means we're going to talk about the magnetic field of the Earth, near the Earth, and through discussion of the magnetosphere. So we're going to start with the more basic parts or more basic ideas like the intrinsic geomagnetic field of the Earth, and then how does this intrinsic magnetic field of the Earth interact with the solar wind, producing the magnetosphere. So we're going to talk about the structure of the magnetosphere, specific parts, and how they were formed and what are their typical distances or structure. Then from there, we're going to talk about the current systems within the Earth's magnetosphere and how it is being used to determine whether there is a geomagnetic storm through calculations or through through the computations or calculations of what we call a geomagnetic index. So these geomagnetic indices are are used to determine whether there is an ongoing geomagnetic storm. Okay, so let's start with the Earth's magnetic field. So we already know that the Earth's magnetic field is by default or intrinsically of the first order approximation is a magnetic dipole. Okay, so that means it acts like a bar magnet with a north pole on one side, called that the magnetic north pole, magnetic south pole, and your magnetic north pole. Okay, actually, please, this a correction should be made because by convention, this magnetic field line should go to the magnetic south pole, and this magnetic field line should go from the magnetic north pole. So the conventional direction of the magnetic pole of your magnetic field lines should go from the north pole towards the south pole. Okay, so this should be magnetic south pole, and this should be magnetic north pole. Okay, so just to give you an idea, what is the magnetic field of the Earth today? Okay, so from for models, okay, according to models and measurements, so currently we are already approximately closest. The magnetic north pole is closest right now in terms of magnetic north pole, no, closest to the geographic north pole. Okay, before it was the magnetic north pole is around the continent of Canada, North America, and then it drifts slowly year by year towards the other side of the Earth. So right now it is being modeled to be somewhere here, very close, and so that means the magnetic inclination, the difference between the magnetic axis and the rotational axis of the Earth is actually less than 5 degrees. So this figure is actually outdated already. So it's about less than 5 degrees already. So this is for the North Pole, and this is for the South Pole. So this is the magnetic pole. So the magnetic pole is actually drifting away from the South Pole in the Southern Hemisphere. Okay, so as of 2020, the dipole moment of the Earth's magnetic dipole is about 7.7 times 10 to the 22 amperes per square meter. And on the average, at the surface. Okay, this is the surface magnetic field strength. The current models peg it at about 23 to 66 microtesla. So this is about 23,000 to 66,000 nanotesla, which is much higher than the background magnetic field of the interplanetary magnetic field. As you already learned, the solar wind carries the interplanetary magnetic field of the order of 10 nanotesla. So in comparison to the surface of the Earth, in comparison to the solar wind magnetic field or the interplanetary magnetic field, the surface magnetic field is about 2,000 times stronger than the magnetic field of the interplanetary space. Okay, so this is for the surface. At the Earth's equator, it's about 32,000 nanotesla or 32 microtesla. Okay, now this IGRF stands for International Georeference Field. So this is one of the internationally recognized magnetic field models. So there are other institutions that provides a model of the Earth's magnetic field, which are all based from either a physics concepts or physics equations and or based on current measurements. Okay, but everything, for the first approximation, all models approximate the Earth's magnetic field to be a dipole magnetic field. So in spherical coordinate system, okay, given by this, okay, R is the distance from the center, M is the magnetic moment. So this always points towards the north magnetic pole. Theta is the direction from the zenith angle. Okay, and then phi is the angle, the azimuthal angle. Okay, so for in spherical coordinate system, the magnetic field is given by this equation. Okay, that's mu naught m divided by 2 pi r cubed times cosine theta r hat. So r hat is the unit vector along this direction. And then mu plus mu naught m divided by 4 pi r cubed sine theta theta hat. So that's along the direction perpendicular to r. Okay, now, so this gives us the two components of the magnetic field. Again, this is the first approximation. So this is BR. BR is this equation. And B theta is this equation. Okay. We can also express this equation in terms of capital M, which is equal to, which is equal to mu naught M over 4 pi. So that's capital M. So small m, as I mentioned before, is the magnetic dipole moment, and approximately is about 7.7 times 10 to the 22 amperes per square meter. And r is the distance to a point in question from the center of the dipole. So in this case, the center of the Earth. Okay. Of course, we have this equation, this constant. We call this the permeability of free space. It's equal to 4 pi times 10 to the negative 7 newtons per square amperes. You can actually see this from using Biot-Savart law, no? So this is actually a constant associated with magnetic fields. And then theta is the polar angle, so that's the angle from the pole. Okay, so this is your zenith angle. So therefore, the magnitude can actually be computed as follows now. So this is mu naught m over 4 pi r squared divided by 1 plus 3 times cosine squared theta. Okay, so we can actually calculate the magnetic field using this equation and the equator. No? So for equator, this angle, for the equator, this angle is 90 degrees. So that means cosine 90, okay, cosine 90 is 0, right? Okay, so that means at the equator, the magnitude of the magnetic field can be estimated as mu naught over m, mu naught m divided by 4 pi r squared. So if you're going to talk about the surface of the Earth, okay, the surface of the Earth is about 6,700 kilometers. So that's 6,700 times 10 to the 3 meters. So we cube it. Okay, and then times 4 times pi. So this is our denominator. And then mu naught is 4 times pi times 10 to the negative 7. And then we multiply it with m. So that's 7.751 times 10 to the 22. And then we divide it with 4 pi r cubed. So it is about 2.5, about 25 or 26 microtesla, which is almost in agreement to our previous. So that's about 20 of the order of 10 microtesla, or about near 30 microtesla. So based on my calculations, it's about 26 microtesla. So the Earth's equator is about 32 microtesla. So very, very close. Okay, so that means that the first order approximation, this magnetic dipole equation is actually good as a first approximation. Okay, so one of the things that we should know about your magnetic dipole field or the dipole magnetic field is the magnetic field lines that it creates. Okay, so aside from this, actually these are your magnetic field vectors. Now, if we're going to draw the magnetic field lines, it's a little bit different story now. In fact, if we're going to take or draw the field lines, okay, remember field lines is different from your vectors, okay, from your magnetic field vectors itself. So the equation of magnetic field lines in polar coordinates are given by this equation. Very simple. That's R equals R naught sine squared theta, where R, script R, is the distance to the equator crossing the field line M in meters. No? So ito yun, this one. So this line is approximated to be this equation. Okay, but usually because of the large distances that we're talking about thousands of kilometers, okay? We usually express this in terms of what we call the L parameter. Okay, we say L parameter, and that is equal in terms of the distance. Okay, so for example, okay, this can be written in terms of the L parameter, which is measured with distance measured in planetary radii. Okay, so for example, R is equal to L cosine squared lambda. Here, lambda, or R is the distance from the equator crossing. Okay, the field line of the Earth in the Earth radii. Lambda is the magnetic latitude. Okay, so if this is your zenith angle theta, the magnetic latitude is the angle from the equator. Okay, this is the one. And then L is the the capital lambda is the latitude where the magnetic field line intersects the surface of the Earth. Okay, so here we have two lines here. This line, this is the distance of this point from the center. This line is a distance from the surface to the center. This point is where this magnetic field line intersects the surface of your planet. So for example, for the Earth, actually, you can actually do this in Excel. No? This is very easy to do in Excel. So for example, this is the Earth. Okay. So L here, the L parameter is the distance of the L parameter for the Earth is 1 when the point is at the surface of the Earth. Okay, so that means if L is equal to 1, you are at the surface of the Earth. If L is equal to 2, so you're already twice as far from the center as you are on the surface of the Earth. So if you're going to draw the magnetic field lines using this equation, you can actually draw it like this. So this is the magnetic field dipole of the Earth according to this equation. So you will notice here that the Earth here, okay, has a radius equal to 1. So, okay, that's the x distance from the center. So this is L. Okay, so let's say, for example, this line. Okay, this line, this magnetic field line is the magnetic field line equal to L equal to 2. Okay. So you can actually use this now. For example, for lambda equal to 0, so that means you are at the equator. So if you're at the equator, lambda is equal to 0. So cosine 0 is equal to 1. So therefore, the distance of your magnetic field line at the equator from the center of the Earth is equal to the L parameter. So here we're going to set the L parameter first, and then at different latitudes, you can actually know how far is the point from the center of the Earth. Okay, so for example, this point, again, is on the equator, so lambda is equal to 0. So this point is r away from the center, which is equal to 4. So this magnetic field line is actually the magnetic field line at L equal to 4. Okay, so you can actually do this as an exercise. No, I just plotted this using Excel. Okay, it's very, very easy now. So it's very easy to just plot this equation. Okay, now as you will notice here that the magnetic field lines, okay, at different latitudes. So for example, okay, so let me just set up my drawing. Okay, so for example, at this point, okay, so this is your R. Okay, so you will notice that at this point, the magnetic field is in this direction. Okay, so at this point, the magnetic field is in this direction. Okay. Okay, so at this point, you can actually draw the magnetic field. So at different latitudes, so this is your latitude, the direction of the magnetic field at certain points will be different. Okay, so for example, at the equator, the magnetic field line is horizontal with respect to the surface. But at higher latitudes, the magnetic field line either points downward towards the surface, or for example, here, the magnetic field points upward with respect to the surface. Okay, so at different latitudes and at different heights, we can actually define the components of the magnetic field. And this is what's important when we deal with the geomagnetic field and its relation to space environment. Okay, so okay, let me just clear the annotation. Clear. Okay, so this is now the typical or the predefined or by convention the components or how we define the components of your magnetic field. This is in local coordinates. Okay, So for example, if this is your magnetic field, this magnetic field has three components now. Your X component, your Y component, and your Z component. So take note, your X component of this magnetic field points toward the geographic north. This component, the Y component of the magnetic field, points towards the east direction. And then the Z component points downward. So that means, okay, the vertical component is defined as positive if it is downward. This is by convention. Okay? And then the horizontal is northward if it's positive. Okay? Now, this is our horizontal magnetic field, and this is a direction towards the magnetic North Pole. Okay? So towards the magnetic North Pole, that is the horizontal magnetic field, and that is the combination of your X component and your Y component. So by defining the horizontal component, which is X squared plus Y squared, we can actually define this angle. This angle is what we call the inclination. So the inclination is the angle between the horizontal component and the total magnetic field. So this is your inclination angle. So that means in terms of these two parameters, in terms of the inclination and the total intensity, the horizontal component is equal to B cosine I. Now, next would be the vertical component. So based on this figure, the vertical component Z in terms of the magnitude and the inclination is equal to this now. So vertical component Z is equal to B times sine I. Now, the inclination, on the other hand, combining these two, is actually given by arctangent Z over H. So if you know Z and H, you can actually calculate the inclination. Sometimes we call this the deep angle or deep latitude. Okay, so if we're going to, how important is I? Now, if we're going to, let's say, place several, several compasses from the magnetic equator and until the or up to the magnetic pole. Okay, the compass will actually be directed at different directions, like this one. So at the magnetic equator, because the horizontal component, because the magnetic field, as I showed you earlier, is purely horizontal. So that means it doesn't have a vertical component. So that means the inclination is equal to 0. So that means the compass at the magnetic equator will be horizontal. Okay, but as you go up, as you go further higher in latitude, the deep angle, the needle of your compass, if it is allowed to move vertically, will actually go slip downward or dip downward. Okay, that's why it's called the dip angle. So that tells you how much your compass needle will dip downward towards the surface. So as you go up, the dip angle actually increases until when you go to your magnetic pole, wherein the magnetic field line will be pointed vertically with respect to the surface. So that means it's a pure vertical. The magnetic field is pointing pure vertical. So your inclination is equal to 90 degrees. So if we're going to go to North Pole, okay, or South Pole, magnetic South Pole or magnetic North Pole, if you're going to place your compass, that compass will actually point downward. Okay, but right now we are actually near the equator. So the needles for your compasses will actually point horizontally. Okay, and then lastly, another angle that we could actually define is what we call the declination. So the declination is the angle between the direction at a certain point towards the North Pole with the direction towards the geographic North Pole. Okay, so how important is this? For example, if you hold a compass, okay, that compass will actually point toward the north magnetic pole. Okay, so if the declination at that point is around zero or near zero, so that means more or less that direction is also the direction of your north geographic pole. But if the declination is a bit far, so that means, for example, if the declination at a certain area or a certain place is about, let's say, 5 degrees, okay, so that means your compass will point to the North Pole. So that means the true geographic north will be 5 degrees off that direction. So that's why I call declination. Okay, the declination in the angle between the north geographic pole and the north or the magnetic pole. Okay? Now, your models, your magnetic models, including IGRF, provides a model for these parameters now. That includes the magnetic field, total magnetic field B, the horizontal and vertical component, the inclination, and declination. So by the way, no, if you know the horizontal and vertical component, we can actually use that to calculate the total field strength at the surface. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, these parameters H, Z, I, D, and B are actually provided by several magnetic field models. So these are some of the internationally recognized magnetic field models. One of the most famous is actually the IGRF, International Geomagnetic Reference Field, and the World Magnetic Model, developed by NOAA and the Department of Defense. So because this is very important, no, this magnetic model in dealing with, for example, navigation. Okay, if these magnetic models are accurate to the true or very accurate relative to the true magnetic configuration of the Earth, and then all the technologies that depend on magnetic field information will work very well. Okay, just to give you an example, this is the total intensity in nanotesla. Okay, so this is B using the World Magnetic Model. Okay, so I graphed this using MATLAB when I downloaded a code that generates this model. So the version of this model is 2000. So every 5 years, the World Magnetic Model is being updated. So every 5 years. So for example, this is the total intensity in nanotesla for year 2000. So the red ones, or the closer to the red ones, have higher magnetic fields. Closer to the blue ones are low magnetic fields. And as you will notice in this figure, you can see that there is a very small or very low intensity magnetic field near the Atlantic, near the South Atlantic or South America. Okay, this is very important especially for geophysicists and space scientists alike, because at this area, because the magnetic field here is weak, so that means the outside magnetic field influence will have a more direct influence here than in the other. So in other words, the magnetic field protection in this area is less than the magnetic field protection of this area. We have a special name for this, no? This is actually called the South Atlantic anomaly. Okay, so for the South Atlantic anomaly 2000, it's located somewhere here. Now, if we move 5 years later in 2015, okay, the magnetic field model, this World Magnetic Model, has been updated. No? So 5 years later, the magnetic field now changed like this now. So you notice that the gradual difference between 2000 model and the 2005 model. So there's already there is already an apparent increase in space or increase in the region that this South Atlantic anomaly occurs. This is 2010, so you will notice that it extends further eastward. And then 2015, and then 2020. So right now, it seems to be that there is another anomaly happening somewhere here. Okay, so this is 2020, and this is and today is actually here in the Philippines, specifically somewhere in Manila. The total intensity is about 41,000 nanotesla. Okay, in the here in the Philippines. Okay, now if we're going to extend it further, let's say in 5 years' time, it is being forecasted to be wider, even wider. Okay, so let's go again back to 2000. So you notice that the gradual differences, the gradual evolution of the South Atlantic anomaly. It appears to be, number one, that the South Atlantic anomaly is expanding, and it appears to be that the South Atlantic anomaly splits into two. And this has been reported both by the European Space Agency and and by NASA. Okay, so using measurements, remember this is a model, no? And this actually corresponds very well to the spacecraft borne magnetometers, specifically the SWARM constellation of satellites that measures the Earth's magnetic field on the above in space. And it appears to be that this behavior of the South Atlantic anomaly actually correlates or corresponds or agrees to the current measurements. So it appears to be that there is a slow splitting of the dent. So this dent is the depleted or the trough or the minimum magnetic field intensity in the surface of the Earth. Okay, and this has also been recorded in a recent publication 4 years ago by Pavon, Carrasco, and DeSantis, wherein using some models, they showed that throughout time, the South Atlantic anomaly extent area in square kilometers actually increases. Okay, so that means the South Atlantic anomaly area widens, but the minimum intensity in this area decreases. Okay, and why is this important? No? Because as mentioned, that magnetic field is actually a protection from solar wind. No? And actually, this part of the Earth is actually the one that is closest to the Van Allen belts. So in terms of satellite operations, okay, this is one of the more dangerous places for satellites to operate because of the risk of being exposed to radiation coming from the
Question, sir.
plasmasphere and Van Allen radiation belts. Yes, question.
Sir, mag-expand, mag-continuous pa rin ba yung expansion niyang ano?
Based on models, it appears to be continuously increasing, no? And the dip is increasingly is being reduced continuously. Okay, but the problem is that the source of this anomaly is still unknown, because remember that the source of the magnetic field of the Earth is not really set in stone. But right now, the prevailing theory is that the magnetic field of the Earth is coming from the Earth's core, no? Because there are molten iron at the Earth's core, and that molten iron is the one that provides the magnetic field.
If
So
ever,
that
sir,
means, yes, question?
Kaya niya ba, may expansion niya ba, kaya niya bang sakupin yung, as in global na yung masakop niya? Weakening na.
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe. But that's why it's being monitored by geophysicists. No.
Okay.
So that's why this research are very important. But to give you an historical perspective, no. Okay, the South Atlantic anomaly is not actually there to begin with. No. In fact, based on models, this is the 50-year evolution of that South Atlantic anomaly. So in 1600, there are actually two areas where there is low magnetic field. No? Some are in the Philippines and some are in Africa. But gradually the anomaly disappear and then move closer to the current position of the South Atlantic anomaly. So this is actually this study is also very important, especially for navigation, because most of our navigation technologies depend on the existing geomagnetic models. So it's possible, anything is possible. It's possible that this dip may be already the uh, uh, the extent. Kaya so kumbaga hanggang dito na lang siya, or it's possible that means it may happen na it will slowly disappear again, or it can move somewhere else as been demonstrated before. Okay, so right now nobody knows what will happen in the future, but all we can do right now is to try to monitor it and produce some models to predict what might happen in the future. Okay. Okay. Now, this is also very important for example, in my studies in the ionosphere, because remember that ionosphere is actually a plasma, no? So the plasma, as we've learned before, plasma behaves according to the configuration of your magnetic field. So that means the plasma in the ionosphere also behaves according to the magnetic field of the Earth. And if the magnetic field of the Earth changes, that means the behavior of the ionosphere will also change. Okay, now let's go to horizontal intensity. So this is just the horizontal intensity. From here, the horizontal intensity is maximum at around this region. This is the equator. And then naturally, it is 0 at the pole. So right now, this is where the poles are located. This area and this area. So this is where this is where your poles are located. Because remember, when at the poles, the magnetic field is pointed downward. So there is no horizontal component. So naturally, at the poles, your H is actually low. But at the equator, it's actually maximum. Okay, now next, vertical component. So you will notice again, the vertical component, okay, is actually downward to be positive. So that means from the South Pole, at the southern hemisphere, the magnetic field, the vertical component of the magnetic field is pointing upward. That's why it's negative. So this is negative. So we notice in the contour line. So this is green, blue, green, teal, blue to violet. This is negative. And then above the magnetic equator, the vertical component is actually pointing downward. So that means it becomes more positive. So from this, we can actually determine, or we can actually identify where the magnetic equator lies. So this is where the magnetic equator lies, at 0 component Z. Okay, and at the equator, or near the equator here in Manila, it's about 12,000 nanotesla in magnitude. Okay, compared to about 40,000 nanotesla for the horizontal component. Okay, so that means, okay, because the Z components is 0 here, so this is your magnetic equator, that means this is also where your inclination is equal to 0. Like this. You can see that this is the only one, this is the only line that is retained. Okay, so how important the Philippines is. Okay, so in Manila, it's about 17 degrees. But in Mindanao, according to this model, that is where your magnetic equator actually lies. So we are actually located near the magnetic equator, southern Philippines near the magnetic equator, and in the northern Philippines, we are actually in the low latitude area. Okay, so just by studying information or data, getting data in the Philippines, you can actually study both the equatorial region and the low latitude region. Okay, in terms of space weather and space environment, the magnetic latitude or the deep angle or the inclination location is more important than the geographic location. Okay, so if we're going to place a needle near us or here in the Philippines, it will actually dip a little bit downward at about 17 degrees. So if you have a compass right now, you will notice that that compass will actually dip a little bit lower than relative to the horizontal direction because we are already in the north hemisphere. But if you go to in Mindanao, that needle compass will actually point almost horizontal. Okay, so just so for example, if you go again, as I mentioned before, if you go higher, the magnetic needle or the needle of your compass will actually point deeper and deeper as you go up as you go towards or as you go nearer to the magnetic. Okay, now for the declination in the Philippines, in Manila, for example, is about negative 2.3. So that means if the needle compass points here, that means a true geographic north is 2.3 degrees off your needle. More or less, it's already acceptable if you just want to know where you want to go, northward, southward, eastward, westward. But as you go, as you will notice that most of the places will have a declination of very near to 0. But as you go near the North Pole or South Pole, the declination actually increases significantly. Okay, so those are your magnetic components in a global perspective. Questions, please.
Answer.
None ba naman? Okay, sige. Yes, okay. Now we have already talked about your intrinsic magnetic field of the Earth. This is actually the one that protects us from the solar wind. Now, what happens now if we have going to allow this intrinsic magnetic field to interact with the solar wind? Okay, so again, this is another a reimagination or I already graphed this again, and like we already know that the first approximation, the Earth's magnetic field is similar to a bar magnet. Okay, now what happens if we introduce a influence, let's say from the right side, from the left side? Okay, so let's say we introduce a infinite plane of superconducting material wherein the magnetic field is actually parallel to this axis, parallel to the vertical axis or relative to this graph. So it would look something like this. Okay, so if there is a magnetic field, an external magnetic field influence at the right side, so that means that there is a disruption or the shape of the usual magnetic dipole will change. Okay, so imagine, so this is for a infinite plane of superconducting material. placed upstream from of the magnetic dipole. So upstream papunta rito. Okay, so imagine how is it in terms of your usual magnet. So imagine you place a similar object beside this, like this one. Okay, so this is the you see the change in the magnetic dipole configuration of your usual magnetic field. Okay, this is the same concept as this one, but this is for a parallel field. Now, if we have a solar wind, so that means there is some kind of curve action or curve influence. So this becomes, so from this figure becomes this figure. So this actually approximates better than your previous model. Okay. So in other words, if your magnetic field dipole interacts with a curved superconducting boundary, okay, it would look like this, which is very much similar to what we have right now sa magnetosphere. Okay, so this provides a good approximation to a three-dimensional magnetospheric field shaped by a solar wind interaction. And because of the solar wind, okay, that is being constantly provided by the sun. Remember that solar wind is always there because of the temperature, because of the pressure difference between the solar atmosphere and the interplanetary space. So the solar wind will always be there. So that means the magnetic field of the Earth is always shaped like this. Okay, because of, as I mentioned before, because of the fast-moving solar wind, it actually creates a bow shock. Okay, now before going through the parts of the magnetosphere, I would just like to emphasize the following magnetic field lines. So if you can see the blue magnetic field line, that is the magnetic field line of the IMF. So this is interplanetary magnetic field. So this is the magnetic field carried by the solar wind. Okay, the red lines are the close field lines. When you say close field lines, so near the surface of the Earth, this magnetic field line actually form closed loop between the Earth. So if, for example, this field line goes out of the Earth, it will return in the Earth. So that's why we call it a closed field line. Okay, and then the open gray or the gray lines are your open magnetic field lines. Though, yes, I mentioned before that magnetic field lines always form closed loop. So it's always closed. Okay, so that means while it's true that within this region, these magnetic field lines are open, but this always connects to another magnetic field. Maybe this connects to your interplanetary magnetic field or so. So my point is that while it looks like an open field line, it definitely will close. Let's say it interacts with the magnetic field line of this space or the interplanetary medium. Or let's say, for example, at the magnetotail, this magnetic field line will actually close at the magnetotail. Okay, around 100 to 200 Earth radii. Okay, so this is very, very far. Or it can also interact with the magnetic field produced by other planetary bodies. Okay, now let's look at the parts of this of our magnetosphere. So first, we have the bow shock. So the bow shock is formed to a relative supersonic speeds of the solar wind. So the bow shock separates the free streaming solar wind from the region where the presence of the Earth's magnetic field has significant influence in the space environment. So in other words, this bow shock is the interface between the interplanetary space or the IMF to the region where the influence of the Earth's magnetic field is more, or the Earth's magnetic field is more influent. It has a bigger influence in this region. So it's like this bow shock is the interface between these two. So beneath that is what we call the magnetopause. So the magnetopause, okay, this is your magnetopause. So the magnetopause is the boundary of the magnetosphere, okay, on the day side of the Earth. So that means the Earth facing the sun. This region, this is about around 10. This is about 10 Earth radii, typically. Okay, and this distance can actually be calculated, okay, by equating the solar wind pressure. You can actually see this on the book by looking at the solar wind pressure, and then you can equate that to the magnetic pressure exerted by the Earth's magnetic field. Okay, so this magnetopause on the day side is actually the equilibrium point wherein the pressure coming from the solar wind is canceled by the magnetic pressure. Because remember, magnetism or magnets actually exert pressure as well. So imagine you have two bar magnets and you place a the like poles between the two magnets. You will see that there is repulsion. So that repulsion or even attraction, okay, is actually you can feel the pressure between the two. Okay, so the place where there is the position where the pressure of the magnetic field of the Earth equals the pressure exerted by the solar wind. So that means that is where you can find your magnetopause on the day side. On the poles, because of it's skewed. The pressure is skewed with respect to the solar wind. So that means this is a bit farther than the day side. In fact, typically this side, the polar side of the Earth is about 15 Earth radii in width, in and distance. So this is about 15 Earth radii. This is 15 Earth radii. Now, in between these regions, we now have the polar cups. Polar cusp is the interface between the night side and the day side of the magnetosphere. So in other words, okay, so you will notice here, this is the day side, this is the day sun facing Earth, and this is the night side of the Earth. Okay, so this magnetic field line is actually part of the night side already. Okay, and this part of the magnetic field is actually part of the day side magnetoforce. So in between these two is where the polar cusps are. And this is where your solar energetic particles coming from the solar wind enter the Earth's atmosphere. So that's why it's called cusp. This is where these particles come in, and that's why your aurora is usually formed first at the Earth's magnetic poles. So this polar cups is where the energetic particles from the solar wind precipitate and interact with the atmosphere and the ionosphere. Now, in between the magnetopause and the bow shock is where your magnetosheaths is located. So this is the region between the bow shock and the magnetopause, and this is filled with shocked plasma, solar wind plasma, which flows around the magnetopause. So the plasma here is much denser and hotter and slower than the ambient solar wind flow. So imagine if you could go to the sink later and then you turn on the faucet, okay? If you can see it hit the sink, you will notice that initially the flow of the water is very fast around the center of the sink. And then you will notice that there is some kind of a accumulation of water where the water slowed down at the edge before the water goes down again. So imagine the presence of a lot of water at the edge. So that is what a magnetosheath looks like. Okay, so that's why the magnetosheaths okay, depicted by a red-orange color here, shows that the magnetosheet is part of the magnetosphere where there is much plasma than the others. Now, after the magnetosheet, we can talk about the plasma mantle. So the plasma mantle is where your open field lines are located, as depicted by this lines. Okay. Now the plasma from the magnetosheet expands to this region. You can see that there is a gradual decrease in plasma here. No? So that means some of the plasma from the magnetosheet diffuses towards the plasma mantle. Okay. And these are converted downward. So this is converted downward. Okay. Now, from here, we can actually look at the both north lobe and south lobe of the magnetotail. So the magnetotail contains the highly stretched magnetic field lines. So this is the highly stretched magnetic field lines. But these three representative magnetic field lines and these three representative magnetic field lines are actually close at the end of the magnetotail, which is very far. Which is very far compared to this region. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, the magnetotail contains the highly stretched magnetic field lines on the night side. So this is the night side along the solar wind flow. A few hundred Earth radii is the distance. And this is where low plasma densities are located. Okay, so the green ones and even the blue ones is where plasma densities are very low. Okay, now plasma sheet is where it's a sheet-like region. So it's like a thin sheet here near the equatorial plane. So this is the equatorial plane between the north and south lobes of the magnetosphere. And this is where the magnetic field is weakened. But hot plasma accumulates here, depicted by the yellow ones. So the plasma here, actually the density of the plasma in the plasma sheets is actually comparable to the plasma density in the plasma mantle. Okay. Now we also have the neutral sheets. So the neutral shield is formed due to the reversal of the magnetic field between the north and south lobes. So remember that the magnetic field in the north lobe of the magnetotail points, in this case, to the right, to the left, towards the magnetic north, towards the magnetic pole here, the north geographic pole. But in the south lobe, the magnetic field points away. So because of the reversal, because of the differences between the north, the direction of the magnetic field in the north lobe and in the south lobe, there must be a neutral sheet at the center. Okay, wherein that's the boundary between the north and south lobe of the magnetotail. Now, and lastly, we can also talk about the plasmasphere. So this is the innermost part of the Earth's magnetosphere. It is a donut-shaped region of low energy charged particles. These actually are cold plasma, okay, that is centered around the Earth's equator and rotating around it, along with it. In fact, this is the one that overlaps with the Van Allen radiation belts. Okay, so the plasmasphere and the Van Allen radiation belts are overlap in this region. Okay, so as we already know that the Van Allen radiation belts are concentric tire-shaped plasma belts. Okay, this is the shown in blue. Okay, these have high energetic electrons and protons. And these are due to these are trapped particles caused by the magnetic field. Okay, so the difference between the plasma sphere and the Van Allen radiation belt is that the plasma contained in the plasma sphere are donut shaped, and they are cold plasma. On the other hand, for the Van Allen radiation belts, the plasma there are energetic, so that's hot plasma. Okay, but some of their regions are intersect with each other. Okay, so this is what a changing magnetosphere would look like. So based on two different models. So you will note, you can see here the magneto sheets. So one of the things that you can learn here is that when the magnetic field of the magnetosphere is compressed, so that means there is a fast-moving solar wind that contains high density. So can see it here, no? You can see that when the solar wind particle becomes red, so that means you have high energy, then you have high density, and it is moving fast. You can see that the magnetopause at the day side is compressed, but it is moving with low density. You can see that the magnetopause or the magnetic field is a bit relaxed on the front side. Same goes here. Okay, so this is what the magnetic field of the Earth or magnetosphere looks like with changing influence of the solar wind. So the shape of the magnetic field basically is dictated by the influence of is dictated by the solar wind. So what happens to the solar wind? That solar wind actually affects the magnetic field of the Earth. And in connection to that, so that means we can actually define several current systems. So as you already learned before, that there are four major or five major current systems in the magnetosphere. You have the ring currents, then you have the magnetopause current, you have the field-aligned current, you have the tail current, and the neutral shade current. So you will note, we can see it here. You already saw this figure before. Okay, so this is how the current system would look like. Okay, in this noon, midnight, meridional cross section. So we say if you encounter this term, no, noon, midnight, meridional cross section. So that means this is the cross section when you, for example, slice the Earth along the poles. Okay, so the Earth is usually drawn like this now. This is the day side, and this is the night side. So this side of the Earth is actually noon, because that is the one facing the sun, and this side is where your midnight is. Okay, so this picture is actually that noon, midnight, meridional cross section. And in this cross section, you can see that the magnetopause current on the day side is actually pointing eastward, but the magnetopause current at the northern side and southern side, and even the tail current is pointing westward. Okay, so that means this is north, south, east is toward us, toward you, and westward is toward into the page or away from you. Naturally, from there, because this current are forming closed loops, so the current sheets or the current neutral sheet current is pointing away from you, toward you, just like this. So this is a three-dimensional visualization of this current system. Now, for example, if we cut this figure of the Earth along its equatorial line or equatorial plane, we have what we call the dawn-dusk cross-section. So we say dawn-dusk cross-section, so that means this part is dawn. Because remember, the Earth is spinning like this. So this is the dawn. This is, this is the dusk. And this is dawn. So that's dawn, dusk. So this is cut along the equatorial plane. Looking from, this is, you can actually imagine this by looking from above. Okay, so from looking from the north, you can see that this is your ring current rotating westward. Okay, this is the magnetopause current. This is the tail current. And these are the partial ring current. Of course, I can talk about all these current systems, but that will not be our focus today. But I would like to focus on the two main current systems that is important to me or to us, because that's the current system that is near the Earth, and that is the ring current and the magnetopause current. Now let's go to the magnetopause current. Okay, specifically in the day side. No? So what happens here is this. No? So remember that your solar wind, okay, let's say there's no complication in terms of the magnetic field. Okay? So let's say we have a magnetic field-less solar wind. Okay, so that means the electron and protons carried by the solar wind are directly towards the Earth. Okay, now the z direction here is the North Pole. So this is the direction facing the sun, and this is the east. Okay, just like this one. Okay, so again, if the magnetosphere is only pointing upward, because remember, at this region, at the equatorial region, the magnetic pole, the magnetic field is pointing upward. Okay, and then let's say there's no plasma. So okay, just to keep things a little bit simpler. Okay. Now, once the electron enters the magnetopause, because of the presence of the Z, okay, Z component, so the magnetic field is pointing toward you. The velocity is toward to the right. Okay. So remember your circular motion for particle. That's why we started there, diba? Okay. So again, so here we have magnetic field pointing toward you. And then the speed here is pointing in this direction. The speed of the proton is pointing in this direction. Okay, so remember that F equals Q V cross B. So in this case, the magnetic force exerted on this electron as it enters this region of the magnetosphere will be directed this way. And the force exerted on this proton would be in this direction. You can look at this. V cross B equals F. V cross B equals F, pero negative si electron, so the force will be in this direction. Okay, but my main point is that the electron will move in this direction. The proton will move in this direction. Okay, conventional current says okay, in your electricity, in order to determine the direction of the current, conventionally, we use the direction of your positive particles. And that means that's the opposite direction of the negative particles. So that means if the proton will move this way, so that means there is a current going in this direction. That is why at the day side, in this area, the magnetopause current goes this way, eastward. Okay? Now that is the opposite direction of the ring current, because the ring current is actually produced because of, as I mentioned before, it is due to the drift, the westward drift of your trapped electrons and protons. Remember your drift, your plasma drift, no? Your particle that drift. So the net effect of the bounce, drift, and gyro motion of the charged particles around the magnetosphere or around the Earth will produce a flow of protons or positive ions in the westward direction, and the electrons will move in the eastward direction. Okay, I hope you still remember our lesson during that time. Okay, so again, conventional current says that the direction of the current is the direction where your positive charges move. So that means we are going to follow the direction of your protons. So the direction of your protons is westward. So that is where your ring current will go. Okay, so the ring current is very important in determining your geomagnetic storms. Okay, because we're going to measure the ring current as a proxy or as a representative parameter in order to know whether there is a geomagnetic storm that happens. Okay? Now, so what happens now when this solar wind now interacts with the Earth's magnetic field? Okay? So, okay. Let me go over this. Sorry about that. So as the solar wind flows past the magnetosphere, it exerts a tangent stress on the magnetopause boundary. So this drives the large-scale plasma convection in the magnetosphere, and the tangential stress, okay, arises primarily from the magnetic field line reconnection at the day side of the magnetopause. So this results with a reconnection-driven convection. When you say convection, that's the flow of fluid, in this case plasma, okay, and can be visualized, for example, by a southward wind magnetic field line. So that's why in the previous lesson, I asked you to graph solar wind magnetic field, specifically the BZ, because in order to determine whether there will be a geomagnetic storm or not, that BZ is the one that we look at, that we have to look at primarily. Okay? So for example, if you have a south pointing magnetic field, okay, like this one. Okay? So if this is moving toward the Earth, so as you already know, that magnetic reconnection will happen here because of the presence of the plasma in this region, and the magnetic field points in opposite direction. So it then reconnects with the northward terrestrial field on the day side of the magnetopause. Now, this part, you will notice here that there are two new, because of the reconnection, the two new open field lines connecting the Earth. This is the magnetic field line coming from the Earth, and it is reconnected with the magnetic field of the solar wind. And it is carried over the poles where they are, like this one. Okay. Now, as it reconnects, it now reconnects again on the magnetotail, because remember that this is also a plasma region, and then this magnetic field line points opposite with respect to this magnetic field line. So when they are close together, magnetic reconnection, a second magnetic reconnection happens. Now the newly closed field line will now be part of the this newly closed field line will now be part of the magnetic field line of the Earth. Okay, so remember that again, the magnetic field line coming from the Earth now reconnects with the magnetic field line of the solar wind. and then that magnetic field line again reconnects at the side, forming a new terrestrial or Earth field line. And this field line that emerged from this reconnection will now be part of the solar wind field line. Now the newly filled closed line moves now toward the Earth. So that's number 8. And then around out to the day side of the Earth. And from there, the process begins. Okay, so that's the overall configuration, what happens to the magnetic field lines once a southward pointing solar wind field line or interplanetary magnetic field line interacts with the Earth's magnetic field. Okay, so this is summarized by this animation. So this is an example of a CME that has a southward pointing magnetic field line. But just like what was asked me a while yesterday, that this kind of process is not only produced by a CME. It can also be produced by a fast-moving solar wind with high density emerging from corona holes. And this is one of the main reasons or one of the main processes that is the reason why we could also have aurora formation even during solar minimum, where the occurrences of coronal mass ejections is very low in occurrence rate. So the point is that we have a south pointing magnetic field here. This time it is being carried by a CME. And then this magnetic field line interacts with your magnetic field, forming the reconnection on the day side. That's the first aurora that can be formed, which we barely notice because of it is faint with respect to the solar radiation. But this second reconnection is the one that we actually observe in the nighttime. Okay. Now, this is an example of a geomagnetic storm. So, for example, if you have a geomagnetic storm like this, you will notice that the magnetic field line of the Earth is actually affected. In fact, it actually, during the storm, the magnetic field line, especially in the equator, is actually reduced. Okay, shown by the decreased number of the magnetic field line. Okay, and this is depicted or is detected using magnetometers around the world. So it depends on which area or location you place the magnetometers, different magnetic indices or geomagnetic indices are formulated. One of which is the geomagnetic index called the DST index. DST means Disturbance Storm Time Index. So this is a disturbance in the magnetic field of the Earth. Okay. This is produced by the World Data Center in Kyoto, Japan, that uses ground-based magnetic field measurements or ground-based magnetometers. Okay. And this DST index is a global index. Okay. And a typical geomagnetic storm has a very specific signature when you look at the DST index. This is an example of that. So the DST index, as I mentioned before, is used to characterize deviations or changes in the quiet time horizontal magnetic field. So remember, in the equator, majority of the magnetic field is along the horizontal. So along the equator, if you want to know the disturbance in the equatorial magnetosphere or equatorial geomagnetic field, we look at the DST index. Okay? And this varies greatly because of the interaction of your southward pointing magnetic field with the northward pointing magnetic field at the equator of the Earth. And for this reason, we could actually use DST as an indirect measure of the ring current, among others. So these are the four uh, geomagnetic field, magnetometers located around the equator. Okay, so as I mentioned before earlier, this is the magnetic equator and there are magnetometers placed around it. Okay, all in all, there are 4 low latitude magnetic observatories, one in Honolulu, Hawaii, one in San Juan, Puerto Rico, one in Hermanus, South Africa, and one in Kakioka, Japan. So from the magnetic field measurements from these 4 stations, the World Data Center in Kyoto produces regularly your DST index. So essentially, when you have DST values that is negative, this means that the magnetic field is weakened, okay, caused by the magnetic storm process. Okay, so this is how the magnetic field line, the DST index looks like for a geomagnetic storm. Okay, and this data is available in the World Data Center in Kyoto, Japan. So this is in October 2001, and you will notice several geomagnetic storms have been observed during this time. Okay, so from the DST index, we can actually know, or we can actually see the current status or phase of a geomagnetic storm. So all in all, there are 3 phases of a geomagnetic storm. The first phase is what we call the sudden commencement. Okay, the sudden commencement occurs as the initial impact of the increased solar wind dynamic pressure that sharply compresses the magnetopause. So remember that when the magnetopause, when the initial impact of your solar wind actually pushes the magnetic field first. So remember that when the magnetic fields are closer together, the magnetic field strength is bigger. So that's why in the DST index, the sudden commencement is depicted by a sharp increase in the magnetic field. Okay, this indicates that initially the magnetic field is compressed during the start of this geomagnetic storm. But after the reconnection happens, okay, the main phase now will now commence. Okay, so this is now the main phase. So the main phase is characterized by a decrease in the horizontal magnetic field because, as I mentioned before, during the magnetic storm, the magnetic field is weakened because of the reconnection. So some of the magnetic field lines created by the Earth reconnects with the IMF. Thereby, the magnetic field of the Earth weakens. Okay, so the main phase ends when the lowest magnetic field measured by the DST index is reached. Afterwards, the storm actually essentially ends, and then the recovery phase now begins. So the recovery phase is a slow process of returning to baseline measures. For example, if before the storm happened, the baseline measure of the DST index is around negative 25 nanotesla. Okay, now the recovery phase after this minimum part of this graph will actually slowly go to that level. And usually it takes days to recover. Okay, you will notice here that this geomagnetic storm, while it is being recovered, while the magnetic field recovers, it appears to be at this point, there is another geomagnetic storm happened that again affected the magnetic field. So before the magnetic field recovered from this geomagnetic storm, another geomagnetic storm hit. And then after several days, it took several days before the magnetic field now returns to its original or normal levels. Again, after some time, there are mini geomagnetic storms and major geomagnetic storm happened at this month. So you can actually go to this website and see the real-time DST index. Okay, so usually from the DST index, we can actually categorize the kinds of geomagnetic storms. Okay, based on geomagnetic indices, DST, we can actually name these storms as follows. It is a weak storm if the DST is between -30 to 550. It is a moderate storm if the DST index, when you say minimum, that's a minimum value it reached. So that's a -50 nanotesla to -100 nanotesla. Okay, it is considered to be an intense storm between -100 if the DST reached -100 to -200, just like this example, and it will be a superstorm if the DST is much lower than -20, 200 nanotesla. Okay, so for example, in this figure, these two are actually intense storms already. This three, 1, 2, and 3. This storm is already considered to be intense because it's already reached about 200 nanotesla. Okay, so another way to indicate the geomagnetic activity through geomagnetic indices is called the AE indices. The AE indices, also known as your aurora electrojet, and this aurora electrojet is designed to provide a global quantitative measure of the aurora magnetic activity, which is produced by enhanced ionospheric currents flowing below and within the aurora oval. So the point is that the AE index is used to look at the aurora zone magnetic activity. DST index is used to look at equatorial low latitude magnetic activity, because remember that the magnetic field configuration in the equator low latitude is much different from the magnetic configuration near the polar caps. So that means the magnetic activity, the way we explain or the way we measure the magnetic activity at those two major regions should be different. So this aurora electrojet is the one that we use to look at aurora activity. So these are the magnetometers that is used to collect and come up with an AE index. So the International Association of Geomagnetism and Aeronomy, or IAGA, officially recognizes AE index and DST index as two of the officially recognized magnetic indices, together with the KP index. Later, I will talk about the KP index. Now, the AE indexes have several sub-indices. Okay, so usually it is subdivided into two indices. So you have your AU and AL. So the AU and AL indices are defined by the largest and smallest values of the AE index. So it's like a maximum minimum. Okay. Now, the difference between AU and AL defines the AE index. Okay, and then we also have what we call the AO index. AO means that's the average between AU and AE. Okay, so in short, again, AE index is the difference between AU and AL. Now, you will notice here that during a certain event, okay, we can actually see the changes in the AU and AL. So again, AE index is aurora electrojet. So we use this to look at the magnetic activity at the aurora zone or near the polar caps. AE index is used to observe what we call or characterize what we call substorms, which is different from geomagnetic storms. So geomagnetic storms are are usually caused by CMEs or high-speed solar winds. And geomagnetic storm usually lasts for several days. Substorms, on the other hand, are usually observed very briefly for a few hours only. And this is only applicable or observable at the polar caps or aurora region. Okay? So when we have a substorm, we can actually observe aurora, even without the presence of southward magnetic field carried by the solar wind. Okay? But in the context of the Philippines, we do not usually observe or use the AE index because it's not significant to us. There might be an increase in AE index, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we in the Philippines will be affected unless it's a very strong unless it is a very strong geomagnetic storm that the effect of the precipitation of particles that causes the aurora and causes these changes in the AE index is actually propagated from the aurora region towards the low latitude region. Okay? But it is only usually observed when we have a very strong geomagnetic storm. Okay, so that means the energy coming from the solar wind is actually felt, okay, slightly in the equatorial region. And last, major geomagnetic index that we would like to talk about today is the KP index. Okay, so KP index is a collection of several observatories that measures a K index. So the P here tells you that it is a planetary index. K index is a station at a specific index. So different stations will have different K indices depending on the current status of the magnetic field in their location. But KP index summarizes them all. So the planetary the K index is a quasi-logarithmic local index with a 3-hour range. So usually we have K index every 3 hours. Okay, it is basically consists of 9 digits, 0 through 9, over an interval of 3 hours in the universal time day. So the planetary K index or the planetary K index or KP index is the mean standardized K index from 13 geomagnetic observatories, okay, anywhere between 44 degrees to 60 degrees in the north and south geomagnetic latitude. Typically, this is what a KP index looks like. So it has a value from 0 to 9. Okay, above 9, we have 5 and above, we have already storm time. 4, active conditions. Below 4, it is already considered to be quiet. So generally, we use KP index as a starting point whether or not we have a active, if there is an ongoing geomagnetic storm, or if the geomagnetic field is active or quiet. So you use KP index if we currently have quiet day or disturbed day. We have a disturbed day if we have KP index greater than 4. And when we say we have quiet day, the KP index is less than 4. Okay, and these are the 13 geomagnetic observatories that is used to calculate your KP index. Okay, so we have most of it are located in the American and European region, and then some of it are located in the Australian and New Zealand area. The United States produced its own scale that categorizes geomagnetic activity and auroral activity. So this is the usual indices now. If your K index or KP index range from 0 to 4, that's a 0, G0 geomagnetic storm. So that means it's either quiet, unsettled, or active. That's fine. Once the KP index reach 5 to 9, it's either a minor, moderate, strong, severe, or extreme storm. Okay. Now, this is usually used to indicate auroral activity. So for example, in the American sector, you can actually see that, for example, if KP index is 3 or less than, aurora is observable in this region. But as you increase your KP, let's say KP5, KP7 to KP9, you can see that the aurora activity is observable towards the mid-latitude. So this is one way to indicate whether, let's say if you're living somewhere here or somewhere here, if you can actually see an aurora. Okay, so if, for example, if you would like to observe aurora in a normal, in a usual manner or regularly, but you can only afford, let's say, to go to UK or Iceland, or let's say somewhere in Norway or northern France, you can actually see aurora if the KP index reached to about 7. But you can actually observe it over France, over Poland, if you have a strong geomagnetic storm of G class 5 or KP index equal to 9. So that is your geomagnetics. That's your geomagnetic indices. So in short, we use geomagnetic indices to indicate whether there is already an ongoing geomagnetic storm or not. So these geomagnetic storms are usually caused by solar storms or transient solar activity. Okay, like say, for example, solar flares, EMEs, high-speed solar winds. Okay, and in the context of near-Earth space environment, we usually use this to indicate whether the magnetic field of the Earth, especially near the surface, is disturbed or not. Okay, now, so far, I've already asked you to provide me or to graph solar wind and solar flare data during the September 17 solar flares. Okay, just to give you an idea, this is the geomagnetic index during this time. So this is September 6 to September 11. So the top part is the AE indices. So this is AU and AL. So the difference between AU and AL is the AE index graph as black. Okay, so the larger the difference between the two means the larger the AE and AO. So this indicates aurora activity. Okay, this indicates aurora activity. It doesn't mean that while there is aurora activity, it doesn't mean that you can actually observe there's already an ongoing geomagnetic storm. Okay, geomagnetic storm is measured by your DST index. So this is the DST index for this flare. And it seems it is a very peculiar DST index or geomagnetic storm because at the onset of September 7, you can see the sudden commencement. But the decrease in the magnetic field caused by your reconnection is actually delayed by several hours. So it took several hours before the ring current and the equatorial magnetic field is affected greatly. Okay, but at this peak of DST, after this time, the DST slowly recovered, but before it recovered to normal levels, okay, it seems that there is another storm that happened. And then before it recovered again. So you will notice that this 2 dips in the DST index is correlated very well with the with your AE indices. Seems to me that there are two geomagnetic storms that happened simultaneously or right after another, which is not seen here. Okay, and in the KP index, you can see that there are two peaks in the KP index. So one peak here corresponding to this event, and then there's another event here corresponding to KP index. So you will notice that the AE indices, the DST index, and the KP index actually correlated very well. Okay, now to complete your graphs before, so together with your solar flare and together with your solar wind, I want you to recreate this figure, okay, and combine it with your previous solar flare and solar wind data. Okay, so I want you to recreate this using September 4 to September 9. Okay, and then together with your solar flare and your solar wind data. Okay, so this is your first homework, just to complete the picture of this event, solar activity and geomagnetic activity. Okay, now, do you follow? So this is a separate submission. And then your last homework for the semester will be homework again. This time, I just want you to fill in or identify or determine the average plasma density, typical values of the plasma density as well as the plasma temperature. So remember that density and temperature are two of the primary plasma parameters we use to describe a plasma. So in the magnetosphere, different parts of the magnetosphere are usually defined by their plasma density. So different parts of the magnetic field of the magnetosphere have different plasma densities. So I want you to determine the average plasma density and plasma temperature for the following regions of the Earth's magnetosphere. Okay, so this includes the magnetosheets, the plasma mantle, the magnetotail, the plasma sheets, the plasma sphere, and the radiation belts. Okay, so these 6 parts, these 6 sections of the magnetosphere will have different sets of plasma density and plasma temperature. Okay, you just have to tabulate it and then make sure that you cite the source of your information, whether it comes from the book or it comes from an internet source. Make sure in your table you show me where did you get the information. Okay, you don't have to compute or you don't have to measure it. Okay, there's no way that you can measure it right now, given this, although you can actually use satellite data to estimate, but it will be beyond this course. Okay, so again, we have 2 homeworks. First homework for this topic is you recreate this and then combine this with your previous solar flare and solar wind data, okay, just to give you a complete picture. And then the next, homework, and then another separate submission is that you need to you have to give me the plasma density and plasma temperature of this, the following regions of the Earth's magnetosphere. Please include the source of your information. If it comes from the book, please cite the book. If it comes from an article or a journal article, write the article. And, or if it comes from an internet source, that's fine with me. Just give me the source of your data. Okay, so that ends our class today. Thank you very much. And I need to ask you to give me some questions. May mga tanong ba kayo?
Wala na po.